Welcome to The Spawn Chunks, episode number 323 for Monday, November 11th, 2024. This is a podcast all about Minecraft, available across all major podcast platforms, including YouTube. If you're enjoying the show, consider subscribing wherever you're listening to this. My name is Jonny, but the internet knows me as Pixelriffs, and joining me without a mattress covering half the background of his shot is Joel Duggan. Hi, Joel.
Hello. There are no renovations happening in my neck of the woods, but tip of the hat to those that are dealing with them. They can be disruptive. They can also be rewarding, but hopefully you'll end up on the right side of the bed when you put everything back together.
Fingers crossed.
Over at your place. Yeah. We were talking about those renovations. We were also talking about my weekend moderating some comic panels at HalCon, as well as Johnny's experience with the new tabletop crew, all in the Render Distance, the extended version of the program that we record every single week. You can get that at patreon.com/thespawnchunks. It's available to the people that support the podcast. It's roughly 30 minutes of extra content every single week. We do a pre and a post show, so you can stick around after the credits to hear more about what we've been up to. There's also things like the monthly Minecraft Hangout and the quarterly Hangouts that we do. The monthly Minecraft Hangout is coming up later this month, usually on the last Saturday. I believe that's November 30th. If you're a member of the Discord, we'll keep you posted as to when exactly that's happening. Quarterly Hangouts, the next one isn't actually going to happen until January 2025, because we're in the middle of the fourth quarter now and pushing through to the end. Man, talking about January 2025, that's wild. I can't believe we're coming up to Christmas already, right? But all of those things are accessible through patreon.com/thespawnchunks.
So what have you been up to in Minecraft this week, if anything? Obviously, you've had a lot of out-of-studio time, so was there any time to fit in Minecraft, at least like planning for creative bits? I
was out of the studio for half the week, and I did do some Satisfactory streams, so I really haven't had any time to plan anything in Minecraft, beyond, again, a little bit more research into the Create mod and trying to do that. The other thing that I didn't anticipate, which I really should have, is that I switched over, obviously, to have a face cam on stream, and I'm enjoying it. People that are watching the streams are enjoying the engagement aspect of it. But I have not yet brought like the camera setup and the scenes and other things that you need in OBS to bring in other things. So I because I've been focusing so much on Satisfactory, those scenes are all ready to go. But the Minecraft one is not quite where I want it to be. And that is all set up for the Citadel. So I need to have like a third scene that I can either use as like a Minecraft mod or one-offs or bingo, like any other kind of Minecraft thing that I might want to do. And really, I just noticed that I should have like a general any video game I want to play scene kind of like all set up with the camera and the new alerts and things like that. So that's basically what I was putting my time into this week. A lot of behind the scenes stuff. Sometimes it has to happen because it makes things going forward a lot easier. But I also this weekend was moderating some comic panels at HalCon, the sci-fi and fantasy convention here that happens annually in the fall in Halifax. And so that was a lot of fun, but also some prep work. Like when you're interviewing comic artists that you may or may not be familiar with, you need to know who they are, what they do, familiarize yourself with the panels and the topics of discussion. And so there was a lot of prep work that went into that. And so while enjoyable, it did mean that I just did not have a lot of time to do any streaming or behind the scenes work this week. I did speak with the members of the Citadel though, because of course Bundles of Bravery has been out for a bit, and certainly long enough for the mods that we use for performance wise on the Citadel to be up to par, and we could move into Bundles of Bravery. And I just said, hey, look, I'm busy this weekend, but let me know if anybody is champing at the bit to get into Bundles of Bravery, because I will find the time to upgrade the server at least to get things going. And the feedback I got was like, meh, we're fine. We don't really need it. There's not a lot going on. And I think there's two things there. One, I think it's the nature of our server, because it is a long-term world. Like, we're more than 7 years old now. So I think that the bundle experience is not necessary at the top of the list for people when it comes to what they're achieving. It's also probably project-based. People are already set up with shulker boxes, and they haven't yet, like you, taken the time to figure out, well, maybe I can improve my shulker box setup with these bundles. That's not really high on the list. Because it's not like a brand new server, and people are not necessarily still scrounging for early resources or exploring much right now. And the other thing is, I think, the casual nature of just the players on the server. So this has got nothing to do with the bundles release. It's more like, the folks that are on this are all busy adults. They have jobs and lives, and while everybody plays a lot, it's not enough to be just like, I have to have the latest thing in Minecraft to move forward. So we're gonna wait on that again. Probably when I have more time and I can sit down and look and see what's going on. Certainly, we'll be updating to Bundles of Bravery before the winter update comes out. But whenever I get back onto the Citadel, that's probably also going to be the point where it's like, okay, well, I've got some new projects on the go. I should probably take the time to go through bundles and see how I can improve my shulker box setup, because I know my shulker islands are getting out of control. So I need to figure out something to make that a little bit easier on me. So like the Minecraft stuff right now for me is kind of like back of mind planning. So it's not necessarily even build plans. It's more like, how do I want to get like all the things in Minecraft available to me so that when I do want to roll forward with stuff, it's accessible and set up, and I can kind of like switch gears at a moment's notice. So like if I want to log in and I want to play Create, I can do that. If I want to log in, if I want to play on the Citadel, I can do that and have it be frictionless from a streaming perspective, and like for me, like where it's my job, like just to have it be something that I can just do rather than realize, oh, there's like 6 hurdles I haven't set up for that. So that's my mission this week, is to kind of really get myself sorted in that regard. So what about you? How are things on the survival guide?
Well, I can see why people aren't super keen to update to Bundles of Bravery, because there's only really one major new feature in there, and that's obviously the feature that I've been focusing on for a long time, so I'm happy that it's out there now. And I've been focusing this week, although the video hasn't come out yet at the time of this recording, it may be out tomorrow at some point. I've been focusing on the other, what I think is a major change in 1.21.3, which is ender pearls loading chunks. This is actually going to be one of the things that we cover in our main discussion this week, because I found exploring these and the possibilities kind of fascinating this week. But I started my first look at, if ender pearls can load chunks, can we use that for systems that transport us back there whenever we want to? And I tried out a setup that allows me to specify a number of days to spend away, just using a crafter and another crafter to provide another comparator signal with a daylight detector adding items to it from a dropper. And so, you know, the crafter obviously having 9 slots means it makes a comparator signal 1 through 9. And if I just close off the first 3 slots of a basically like an interface crafter, then it's going to send that signal to a comparator, and that comparator is looking to match that signal from another crafter with another comparator attached to it that's going to have items popped into it each day. So it slowly adds ingredients, slowly builds up the comparator signal. After 3 days have passed, the signal matches, closes a trapdoor, the ender pearl impacts on the trapdoor, and I get teleported back. And so I decided to set that up as a way to go caving for a few days and not have to worry about how to find the surface again, because all I need to do is stay down there for long enough that 3 days would have passed on the surface, the daylight detector would have seen 3 days come and go, and it would just teleport me home once I was 3 days into a caving expedition. And it worked really well. I think there was a really fun way of experimenting with that, and proved that the ender pearls loading chunks means that they can keep redstone circuitry loaded there as well. There is obviously some stuff that the player would need to be there for if it was random tick based stuff like crop growth or whatever, but most redstone circuits, you know, you could have it teleport you back there once a smelter was done smelting, if you could detect when the furnace is switched off using an observer or something like that, right? And so I was kind of going through a few scenarios of how that could be used, but in this case, I used it to both time my caving expedition, and also the caving expedition was part of showing how bundles can be used for neatening up your inventory whilst you're caving, taking some of the loose odds and ends of lapis and iron and the kind of bits and pieces that you can't craft into full blocks, but you usually get a lot of, which is like, you know, iron, copper, redstone, lapis. With fortune, you're getting often as much as a full block out of some of those. So I was just kind of bundling the leftovers of that and keeping my inventory tidy so I could bring home full stacks of other resources. And so it was kind of a double header episode. It was kind of 2 main topics for it, and I'm looking forward to releasing that this week so that people can see what I've been up to. But yeah, I'm finding 1.21.3 a pretty solid update in terms of the technical side of the game, as well as introducing bundles, which I've obviously been waiting for a while.
I know we're going to talk about this later, but the ender pearl thing as a timer to bring you back after doing a certain thing, or after a task in your main hub has ended. Like, you know, you're smelting 2 stacks of this thing. You don't want to stand around and wait for it, but you know, having an ender pearl in stasis there that's just going to drop you back when the thing is done. It's great. I often see this as a form of transportation instead of a timer. I think
Yeah.
the timer is a really interesting idea. I think the only thing for me would be the jarring nature of all of a sudden whatever you're doing while you're waiting is going to end abruptly.
Yeah, it does. It
Right?
was
Yeah.
it was very funny, like walking towards some resources, being like, "Oh, is that some lapis over there?" And then zoop, and suddenly I'm home.
Yeah.
It was kind of a shocking thing, but it worked, and it made perfect sense for what was the thesis statement of it in the first place. You could obviously make a much more accurate timer as well, because a daylight detector is going to modulate the signal throughout the day, and I was really only having it switch off at night because it doesn't output any signal after it gets below a certain time of night. And then as soon as it starts generating power again, it powers the dropper, which means another item gets put into the crafter. And you could have that be very precise. You could have it be at noon each day by just adding another little comparator module onto the side to make sure it was looking for signal strength 15 from the daylight detector. So you could make it more accurate that way. You could set up maybe like a hopper clock or something like that, some other kind of slower timer if you know more about timer circuits. And I think there's lots of little ways that you can customize stuff like that to tailor it to the task that you want. But I agree, it feels very strange suddenly being yanked out of whatever task you're participating in when you're not expecting it, when you also have a timer running on the side to indicate like roughly how long you've been out caving. And so I had the timer running for my video footage, but I didn't know exactly when I'd hit go on the timer that was going to teleport me back. So it was kind of a shocking experience when it happened. The other thing I've considered doing this with is ancient debris mining would be a really fun way of doing that, where like typically you're digging out a long tunnel, right? If you warp yourself back to the start somehow, once you've dug out a certain amount of blocks or once a certain amount of time has elapsed, then that gives you a very natural conclusion to when you dig that out, and then you can go back through and place the TNT. Or if you're only planning on being in the nether for 2 hours and then you have to get home, then you give yourself basically 6 in-game days, and that amounts to 2 hours of those 20-minute day-night cycles. So you can time your IRL time that way, or you can time the task in Minecraft that way, and I feel like there's a lot of flexibility in that.
Yeah, especially if like you're still getting teleported back to the overworld from the nether. Like that would be key. And really, like even for like end busting or other stuff where like you're going really far afield, and I mean the end is a really easy place to get lost in too.
Yeah.
So to have something, and in the end you can use a bubble column on like the main island or wherever your exit portal is to bring you back, and not have to worry about like which way you went and trying to remember coordinates. Because I've always found the end to be pretty confusing, despite the fact that I know very well how to read Minecraft coordinates. You can get disoriented very quickly.
Yeah. I think that would be a great way of solving the problem that an end base is not really super possible, because you don't have portals that will transport you out like a significant amount of distance in the end, aside from the ones that leave the central island. But if you wanted a base like 5,000 blocks out in the end, setting up an Ender Pearl teleporter, and if you go on like a resource run to the overworld to grab some stuff that you can't manufacture in the end, then it would be pretty easy to just wait on the Ender Pearl to transport you back if you had it set on a timer, or find some other way of triggering it remotely. I'm not sure what that would be, but it would be more possible now that Ender Pearls can load those chunks. So it's an exciting world, and I'm looking forward to getting more into the technology of that, both in the discussion and in future videos. In the meantime, we better get on to this week's news read, because we have another Java snapshot. This is Java Edition Snapshot 24W45A. It was published November 6th, 2024. So the changes in this one are that baby cats and wolves now get a collar with the color that's a mix between the parents' collar colors, if possible, kind of similar to how dyed sheep can provide a color that's in between the two if there is a mixed color. They've aligned the durations of Suspicious Stew effects with Bedrock Edition, so saturation and night vision have remained unchanged, but the duration of fire resistance, blindness, weakness, regeneration, jump boost, wither, and poison Suspicious Stews have all been altered. You can see the changelog for the exact information on that. Some changes have been made to how mobs decide to replace their equipped items with items on the ground. To summarize, because it's a longer list, mobs will prioritize picking up items if they have a higher base armor or damage value, more enchantments, less damage done to the item's durability, or a custom name. In addition, skeleton variants will all prefer bows, piglins and pillagers prefer crossbows, and drowned will prefer tridents. They made some changes to eye blossoms, bringing it in line with the Bedrock Edition release we talked about last week. Bees don't interact at all with closed eye blossoms. They will not be tempted by closed eye blossoms either, and they do not get poisoned when they touch or fly through closed eye blossoms. In terms of the Creaking mob, one change got made where an activated Creaking will not move if a survival or adventure mode player was looking at it. The Creaking will also have full knockback resistance while in that state. Resin bricks also got a bit of a change. They're now used as the material for armor trimming where previously resin clumps were used. There are a lot of technical changes in this snapshot, though that's one of the major things about this snapshot, actually. So the data pack version is now 59 and the resource pack version is now 44. There are a couple of changes to how data generation in the server jar and client jar works. We'll see the changelog for full details, and honestly, a lot of the other details, you should probably check out the changelog as well, because these are a little bit crunchy to go over in full. But to summarize the data pack and resource pack changes, block tag has been added to denote which blocks bees may pollinate, and tags for flowers as a general category have been removed. Tags have also been added to support the preferred weapons of mobs who can pick up equipment, supporting that change we just talked about. And there is a new format for data-driving item models in resource packs, and data packs have been updated to support that. What follows in the changelog is a long list of data formatting changes. We definitely recommend reading the changelog if you're into that sort of thing and want to see what's going on under the hood. Outside of that, notable bug fixes in 24W45A. Another old one, full damage being ignored for a couple of seconds when reloading into LAN or single-player worlds, has been fixed. So no more logging out and then relogging to cancel your full damage. Sprinting not being cancelled upon receiving the blindness effect was also fixed, presumably because blindness is going to be more active if it's a suspicious stew effect as well. Most mobs which can pick up loot preferring swords over axes and downgrading their weapons has been fixed by that change to mob pickups. And in addition to that, some changes affecting the new features as well. Creaking's affected by knockback from mace smash attacks, punch bows, and zoglins has now been fixed, so they are less likely to take any significant knockback from those sources. Resin not generated when the Creaking was attacked by a wolf owned by a player, or resin generated by player-caused explosions have now been fixed. A full list of bug fixes, as always, can be found in the Minecraft.net changelog, linked in our show notes over at thespawnchunks.com.
I was really curious about the data-driven models. It sounds like it opens up a lot of creativity for folks that are doing data packs, mod packs, even adventure maps, to be able to control how a model looks in the hand versus the inventory, versus, an object in the world. There seem to be like a lot of different instances where like you could have it look either different from a model perspective, different from a scale perspective. I find it really interesting that some things in Minecraft, I think the best example is like the trident, where it looks like it's a modeled like 3D model in your hand, whereas other things like a sword look like a pixelized model, like it's a very flat sort of like pixel extruded sprite, I guess is the traditional term for it. And then in the inventory, the sword looks like a sprite, but then the trident looks like the 3D model. Mm-hmm. And so if you were doing something creatively on your own, and to be able to control that, I think that's really, really cool and could open up some fun stuff, even if it's just aesthetics. Like if you don't like the way that the trident looks and you want it to have a sprite, or you want it to have a certain symbol in the inventory that you've designed, I think that's a really neat way to go about it.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's kind of fun. I saw Bartek Bok, who I think is one of the folks who works behind the scenes on data pack changes and stuff, messing around with this in a clip shared on Blue Sky this week, and they were using a shulker box sprite in place of a bundle, and so they had an item that was renamed a shundle, and they were pulling a bow out of it, except the bow was a chest, and so they were firing arrows using a chest that they just pulled out of a shulker box without putting anything down and opening up the inventory and stuff. And so it's very confusing visually, or just like hilarious visually for people who are very familiar with Minecraft and how it should work, but I think it gives players so much more flexibility and so much more opportunity to create either wacky scenarios based on vanilla Minecraft stuff, or when you're making custom maps and retexturing all of these sprites anyway, anything being anything is a really fun way of shuffling those things around. So I think data-driven Minecraft is, I mentioned this at the time on Blue Sky, is slowly moving towards this sort of singularity where everything can be everything else. And that's the kind of flexibility and creativity that people who want to do stuff with map making can have an absolute field day with, while it's not really affecting anybody negatively. If they're playing the survival game, it's not going to become more complicated as a result of that.
The other changes that I thought were straight up were the resin brick item for armor trim. That makes sense to me. That lines up with using other ingot shaped, because it's a resin brick item it looks like an ingot, it's just colored differently, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like that's a pretty straightforward change. But on the flip side, the bees and the eye blossoms, I really feel like these changes are like not the one that people are looking for. I think people are looking for like bees just completely ignoring eye blossoms because they get poisoned by them. And so bees ignoring closed eye blossoms makes sense. But it's like, well, how do you control them to not go to open eye blossoms? And I know that there's a day-night cycle and that bees don't typically come out at night. But if you're in a situation in the nether or you get a bee farm or like whatever that happens to be, being able to control that, or at least have the bee just ignore the thing that's going to potentially hurt it, seems like the better change to make, rather than all these like little kind of tweaks to ignoring the closed eye blossoms and stuff. It just seems like a weird way to go about it. And again, there are now changes to bees on the back end where you control what they are able to pollinate or will be willing to pollinate. And so you could use a data pack to just make sure that bees ignore eye blossoms altogether. But that seems like a lot of work when it should just be part of the game. Like, it doesn't seem like added gameplay. It seems like added work, for the player that maybe wants to make sure that their bees don't get in there and mess with the eye blossoms. And remind me, like, I understand that eye blossoms will close and open with the day-night cycle, but if a player places an eye blossom, does it still do the same thing, or does it stay in the state? It's only when they're placed in a dimension that does not have a day-night cycle that they will then stay as placed.
Or a flower pot, I believe. Like, you can capture one in a flower pot and it doesn't change state, because I think that would do more complex stuff to the relationship between the flower pot and the flower. Unless they've found a way around that, I'm not certain. But yeah, if you pick a closed eye blossom and you place it in the world somewhere at night, it is going to open. So yeah, that's behavior is still maintained. And then if you have one and you're like, I don't want gray dye, I want orange dye, and you wait for it to night, and to get to night, you can plant that one, it will open, and then you can harvest it as an open eye blossom and get orange dye out of it, which is odd, but I think it's fine as a mechanical thing. Like you, I'm still kind of baffled by the decision to make eye blossoms poisonous to bees, because it doesn't provide any like lesson that the player can learn from. Like, a lot of these decisions are made in service of like making sure players understand something, either about Minecraft interactions or about the world around them. If you think about the decision that was made to make cookies poisonous to parrots in response to players writing in saying, actually, chocolate is poisonous to parrots and chocolate is an ingredient in Minecraft cookies, so we should probably like change that up slightly. And instead they made cookies straight up kill parrots instantly when you feed them one, which is brutal, but it teaches you the lesson very quickly. And that's a lesson to learn about real life. Whereas in real life, I don't know, I presume beekeepers have to be fairly selective about the types of flowers they want around the bee nests and beehives, but that's also depending on what flavor they want from the honey and stuff. Like, different types of flowers will yield different flavors of honey, and I don't know if bees typically go to flowers that are harmful to them. Like, you think they would have evolved to avoid flowers like that if there are any. So it's unusual that they put something like this in the game, where it's not an example of a behavior you see in the natural world, but also doesn't serve any kind of gameplay purpose other than, oops, probably better not do that again, I don't see quite why they're clinging to the idea of eye blossoms poisoning bees, other than just a very edge case way of making the Pale Garden biome even more unsettling and eerie. Is like, mobs don't like to come in here, and like, no natural mobs generate there, and if you feed the bees these flowers, they get poisoned. It seems like a very strange thing for them to do. Then again, poison will not outright kill any entity unless it's fatal poison, which is a separate thing that's only given to parrots when you feed them the cookie. So like, bees will still be able to survive being poisoned, they'll just survive on one like half heart of health. So like, in theory, it's not going to be completely harmful to your bees. It's not like the wither effect where you can die from it, but it's still going to be potentially disruptive, and if that bee takes damage from any other source, then you've got the same problem. It's still going to die. So yeah, it's just no idea why they cling to the idea of eye blossoms poisoning stuff. Maybe that's something that they'll reveal in future if they have an explanation video where the devs sit down and do a YouTube video about the new features in the Pale Garden once they're finalized. Maybe they'll explain, assuming this makes the final cut of the update, why bees and eye blossoms have that relationship.
Was there anything else that stuck out about all the technical changes behind the scenes for you?
Yeah, the bug fixes about resin and how to generate resin stuck out to me because I'd made a resin farm. I was experimenting with the mechanics of it in Creative in the Snapshot when I did a stream on this, and having attempted a resin farm, I was surprised that player interactions were limited to just the player and not some of the other things which normally count as the player interacting with or killing a mob, like a wolf. And so I tried wolves. I didn't try player-created explosions. Like, I didn't try lighting TNT next to a Creaking and see what happened, because I presume that they wouldn't blow up. And also, yeah, kind of difficult to maintain TNT explosions without damaging the landscape around you unless you get a lot of water involved, right? So I tried having wolves chase the Creaking around, and all that happens is the wolf just kind of ineffectually nips at the Creaking while the Creaking ignores the wolf entirely, but it doesn't generate that string of particles showing you where the Creaking heart block is, and as a result, I think that is supposed to be when resin is generated, is when you see that trail of particles, and the player was the only one who could do that, and the player was the only one who could create resin by attacking a Creaking. And so I thought, okay, that's strange. I think in Bedrock Edition, they had the wolf be able to farm resin for you. And so I thought, well, maybe that's something that'll get fixed, or maybe they just decided to test it on Java this way and see which one works. And this week, in this snapshot, we get bug fixes, which mean that you can both TNT charge a bunch of Creaking. You can, drop them all into I assume, some sort of waterlogged basin, drop a TNT in there, have them all take damage from that, and it will generate a bunch of resin on the surroundings of the Creaking heart blocks that they are connected to, which is great. The other alternative is getting hold of a lot of wolves, because they'd all have to attack an individual Creaking, and there'd be no real great way of making sure that they attacked one that another wolf wasn't already attacking, right? So I think it makes sense to use TNT for resin farms. I suppose the player has to light the TNT, though, which is the only, difficult thing about that, but it does make resin farming more automatic to have alternatives like wolves and like TNT. I'm not sure if the Creaking would or should fight back against wolves, because obviously the Creaking's movement is defined entirely by whether or not the player is looking at them, but does a wolf looking at them wouldn't have the same effect, I assume. But would the player not looking at the Creaking and the wolf trying to attack the Creaking elicit a retaliation from the Creaking? My guess is no, because the Creaking can't take damage, so the wolf is really just going up to it and trying to bite it and failing. But I'm sort of curious if they plan on having any changes to that interaction further down the line.
I'm curious to see if there's any quirky interactions that could happen between wolves and Creaking, because I always find it kind of funny that wolves would go after skeletons because, dogs' bones. That's great. Dogs and sticks are also known to have very strong relationships.
Yeah.
Some of the dogs that I've seen in the dog parks recently carrying sticks that are basically logs that they are able to lift, where you've got to warn, passersby, my dog is coming down the trail with a 6-foot stick, sorry, but I can't help it.
Yeah, he's gonna sweep the leg if you don't do something. Yeah.
Yeah. There could be some fun opportunities for wolves and Creaking to have that interaction. I mean, I guess limited by the Creaking reaction, but I guess because the Creaking are so difficult to move around, you'd have to almost put them in single cell situations with their own wolf,
Yeah.
and then and then each wolf would have its own Creaking. The TNT, you got to light it by the player, but you could have it in a dispenser with a timer, could you not? You'd have to load it manually, but could you not have the TNT be dispensed lit?
No, unfortunately you can't. It gets into the attribution of who lit the TNT. If you think about it this way, there are some mobs which will react to being blown up by the player versus being blown up by stuff dispensed by a dispenser, and they'll get aggressive to the player if you light TNT near them, but they won't get aggressive towards a target because there is no way of knowing who loaded the dispenser. Like, the dispenser could have been loaded by a hopper, and then you have to go back through the chain of, like, well, who placed the dispenser or the hopper, or who loaded the TNT into the hopper that then gets put into the dispenser. The game doesn't track that level of data, otherwise there would be a ton of other stuff to process in the background on the off chance that it needed to attribute any of those explosions to a player. So yeah, it's difficult, I think, to have an automated, like a fully automated system for resin. It does have to involve some level of player interaction, or the player AFKing nearby so their wolves can attack the creaking. But even then, yeah, I'm curious to see what farm designs ultimately win out over this. I found it relatively straightforward to just corral all of the creaking into one place, maybe bring them into a single block space with a water stream, and then attack them with a sweeping edge sword, and you got basically the same sort of results. So we'll see which resin farm designs come through, which are the easiest to build, and which just become unnecessary in terms of their effort at that point.
And which could be more fun too, right? I mean, it's sword with sweeping edge is fine, but like it might be more fun or cathartic depending on how you feel about creaking to blow them up with TNT.
Sure. Yeah, I can see that being the case. We're going to move on into chunk mail for this week. We have a couple of emails that we're delighted to read. If you'd like to email the show, the email address is spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. We recommend keeping them short and to the point so they have a better chance of being read out on the show. We've got to include them for time, but yeah, we've got a couple of emails, and Joel is going to read this first one.
First email is from Sheepscalibur, a landscape artist in our community, and the subject is fertilized eggs. Hi, Pix and Joel. There's been Minecraft.net feedback topics before asking for making sniffer eggs and turtle eggs to have an option to deactivate their hatching mechanic, turning them into fossils, essentially. Some content creators have also expressed this, if I recall. Now, with resin, the liquid base of hardened amber, coming in the winter drop, I suggest to give resin instead of wax a right-click interaction for eggs when hatching mechanics and turn them off, or turn them into fossilized eggs. Maybe it even changes the texture of the egg into something more orangey. What would you call your assortment of fossils in your base? Sheepscalibur suffocated in a wall of resin. Jurassic Park flashbacks, man. Poor Sheepscalibur, the plight of a mosquito in the Cretaceous period. I think more player control is a good thing. I never will say that's a bad thing. Yeah. For me personally, to be interested in the fossilized sniffer eggs, I think the color would have to be tinted by the resin to something a little bit more neutral so it could be utilized in multiple different ways. As it stands right now, I like the shape and the sub-block size of a sniffer egg, but the green and red pattern, I can't see myself using that in anything other than displaying it as a sniffer egg, which again could be cool if you're decorating a sniffer farm. But like if it was something that was more orangey, or if, as Sheepscalibur mentioned, it was somehow communicated that it is now a fossilized egg, maybe by the name of it after you use the resin on it. If it was gray or brown or pale, versions of what's there, that just would maybe work better. Like maybe it works better with dead coral. Maybe it works better with some of the wood blocks. But giving you some more geometry to play with in Minecraft would be really, really cool. I don't know if I'd want it to be as bright as the resin blocks, bricks or blocks of resin. Because again, I think that would limit its use case. So I don't want it to be necessarily looked like it has been dipped in resin. But I think it's an interesting idea, and I would definitely like to see stuff like that happen in the future, especially if there are more either eggs or egg-like mechanics that come to the game, where something that has a change of state, like copper or sniffer eggs or turtle eggs, that can be stopped by the player to then give another decorative option to them as they're building whatever that is, farm, castle, whatever it is,
Yeah. It's difficult because there are so few things that we don't have this level of control over, and sniffer eggs being so large, you sort of want them to be a feature of a certain place. and then you find that they hatch no matter what. Now, it's interesting that Sheepscala included turtle eggs in the example, because turtle eggs will only hatch if you place them on sand, so all you got to do is change out the block underneath them for something else. You could very easily use, like, a concrete powder if you wanted to use something that had a similar texture to sand, and the eggs would not be able to hatch as a result. And sniffer eggs don't have that. They just have one block that they hatch more quickly on. Instead of taking 40 minutes to hatch on any other block, they hatch with like 20 minutes on a moss block, I think. And so, yeah, I would personally like to have, like you said, Joel, the control over limiting whether or not sniffer eggs hatch entirely. They're quite desirable aesthetically in general, and being able to make, like, you know, some kind of prehistoric looking habitat with dinosaur eggs kind of lying around and that kind of thing makes sense. I think that that's kind of a fun thing to want to have as a tableau in your world, especially when you consider how little of Minecraft is that level of active. You don't tend to think of many other blocks in the world as things that can change state and blocks that can be removed from your world permanently, whether like hatching eggs or, you know, by changing state and decaying in that way. And that was one of the things that, like, copper corroding, it doesn't disappear, it just changes in appearance, and we have the means to freeze that appearance. With sniffer eggs, it's kind of a niche example, but we don't have that, and I think it would be kind of fun to have that level of control, especially if you can apply the resin at any stage, so they could crack a couple of levels and then you could still apply the resin. I think that'd be kind of fun. The only issue that remains is the moral issue of, does it feel like you're trapping a baby sniffer inside there permanently, and do people immediately call you out as cruel for having done this? But it's a video game, we can kind of look past stuff like that. I do think that there'd be a good basis to do this. I don't care as much about the colors of them, because I'd find some use for them somewhere, but I agree that being able to see that something had, like, the sniffer egg wasn't going to hatch because it had been tinted with the resin color. You can sort of imagine it like the way terracotta colors are modified by the base terracotta color. So they just kind of apply a tint from base terracotta to all of the individual colors. I think there could be something like that with a sniffer egg to indicate that it had been coated in resin. But overall, I'm not against the idea. Like you, I think it's a good idea for players to have more control over stuff. So I wouldn't hate it if something like this was done.
It's funny how the moral question comes up, because, I mean, like, is it a fertilized sniffer egg? Maybe it's just a weird green yolk inside that we never see. Like, we don't know the process because they just kind of pop, you know?
Yeah.
No one seems to care about chicken eggs. And maybe that's the difference. Like, chickens are a food source in Minecraft. You can't place the eggs down anywhere. It's just an item. You can certainly throw them. I have thrown a lot of chicken eggs that I've picked up in my inventory over time, just out in the wild doing stuff, landscaping. And I mean, like, I make a game out of it. I just kind of like toss it across the river and just wait to see if I get a chicken. Just luck of the draw, you know? If I don't mourn the egg that I just threw across the river. So yeah, it's a little bit strange when you think about that kind of stuff. But it's the same thing with horses. It's the same thing with rabbit hide, you know, for bundles, and people wanting an option to not have to use rabbit hide for bundles. And I think that that's a valid concern for people that are RPing heavy enough in the game that, you know, they might want to think about that. But I think that too, like, when it comes to that kind of question, separating the food animals, I guess, in the game from other animals and the behaviors just became really clear for me. Like, you interact with cows, but like, they don't do anything like a sniffer egg, and they don't have the same animations. I mean, I think people in the game could argue that they like cows and cows are cute. I know people in life that think cows are cute, but I don't. I mean, in real life, I could say, like, yeah, you know what, I can maybe see that. But in Minecraft, I look at a sniffer with the new model, the new animations, the way that it lumbers around, and think, like, yeah, that's a very appealing mob. I don't look at a cow the same way.
Yeah.
You know, I don't look at a sheep the same way in Minecraft. Chicken, no. Dogs and cats in Minecraft, but I mean, I think that's a whole human, we have them as pets thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, it's an interesting way that Minecraft players will look at different mobs in the game, as opposed to, like, you're cute, we're gonna keep you, versus get on the truck. You know, like,
yeah.
Like, your food, get it, you know, get in the furnace. It's a strange kind of like way that just we as humans kind of like project onto sprites in a video game, I guess.
Yeah, the odd thing about sniffer eggs is that aside from digging them up from ocean ruins, the only time you get one is if you breed two sniffers, and they drop an egg instead of giving birth to a baby version of the animal by default, which is unlike any other animal, even the egg-laying ones, except for turtles. Like, the turtles will lay eggs, the sniffers will lay eggs, but chickens lay eggs naturally throughout the day, and you breed them with seeds and you get a baby chick immediately. You don't go through the egg phase of that. So both sniffers and turtles effectively automatically have to have their eggs fertile, but that doesn't make any sense biologically, and it's not consistent with the other egg-laying animals in Minecraft anyway. I guess maybe you could argue that they have different biologies because the chickens are birds and the sniffer, who knows, and the turtles are reptiles, but that's not how it works in real world either. So who knows? It's an odd an odd decision as always, but I think one that ultimately we could have more control over, I think, is the message behind this one. Next email comes in from Lucky Little Unicorn, who's a community miner member of our Discord, and their subject is the quest for creeper proofing. Hey Pix and Joel, this idea was born of a conversation my husband and I had while watching one of Mumbo Jumbo's most recent Hermitcraft episodes. In it, he displayed his valuables chest and expressed how much he would lose if it was blown up by a creeper. This led me to think, why don't we have a way to reinforce chests? Mojang has already basically laid the groundwork. Netherite, which is lava-proof and blast-resistant, and smithing templates, which could give you the instructions to reinforce the chests. My husband then suggested having different levels of reinforcement, like iron, which is slightly blast and fire resistant, diamond, which could be stronger but not totally resistant, and then netherite, fully resistant for endgame. I think this could be a really cool mechanic and would love to hear your thoughts. Lucky Little Unicorn was blown up by a creeper while trying to guard her chests.
This to me makes a lot of sense from a gameplay perspective. I really like the idea of being able to make the chests a little bit stronger. The progression is there from the examples that they gave, with iron and diamond and then netherite. I don't know what a gold reinforced chest would look like or be used for, but that made me think, okay, well, if you're going to do it with those three resources, then why not have all of the minerals be something that you could use to reinforce a chest with? And I don't know what that could do for other things. Like, what does a lapis reinforced chest look like? Does that make it stronger, or does it have a different effect? Could you take it down a different road mechanically and have it be like, I don't know, resistance to something else, or maybe even just have it be a different color? And that's what really got me intrigued about this. I already use a texture pack that changes my chests to be one like oak wood and spruce wood for regular and trapped chests, but that texture also has like a wrought iron kind of like support, like dark gray iron support around the edges and the trim of the chest. And I really like it aesthetically because I don't feel as bad when my chests are visible in the builds that I'm making. They seem to match more with Minecraft textures. Certainly in my medieval area, they look a lot nicer, because I was never a fan of the orangey kind of texture that the chests had in vanilla Minecraft. So I really think that adding these trims to the texture in Minecraft, while I think the mechanic is a good excuse, I think the real reward would be the options of decorative chests that players would have on the other side. I don't think anybody's going to use the ugly blue diamond chest, or at least I wouldn't be. But that's just me, making a little joke at the diamond's expense. But I think it would be great to have those options in vanilla, because I use a texture pack, but that again requires work outside of the game to get that in there. And I think having the options inside would be good. What do you think?
Yeah, I think ultimately it feels like a life lesson to me, is like, don't leave your wallet out in the open. Somebody's going to walk past and blow it up. I don't think there's not a huge amount of scenarios in which, creeper explosions are going to happen regardless. I think the problem is not necessarily how do I protect my chests from this, it's how do I avoid the creeper getting there in the first place. The other thing to remember is that creeper explosions, with very few exceptions, don't happen randomly. They're always a result of a player interaction with them. So, you could very easily have a creeper walk into your base, but unless there's a snow golem around to interact with it, even iron golems won't attack creepers because that avoids explosions happening in places where, villages and stuff are. Like, the only thing that's going to trigger that creeper is going to be the player, or maybe a stray arrow from a skeleton or something like that. But I think the difference here is, do I protect this stuff by hiding it or reinforcing it, or do I protect the area by lighting it so that creepers don't spawn in the first place? I don't light up all of my builds, but I light up a lot of the interiors, and when they are more secure in terms of the structure of them, I don't worry about creepers walking into my storage room. Like, it hasn't happened for a very long time at this stage. And I think Mumbo's problem, not that I've seen his most recent video, because XP watched it this week for the recap, I think a lot of his storage was just kind of out in the open, and so you consider that kind of stuff temporary anyway, right? Like, it's not the kind of thing where I would invest the time and energy and, material and the netherite upgrade templates, which still require reproducing, which means lots of diamond investment, even without them technically being like a diamond item. I wouldn't want to do all of that for a chest that I was just going to leave somewhere a creeper could blow it up, Like, I think it's a cool idea in principle, but in practice, I think there are lots of sensible things players can do about that without having to netherite explosion-proof all your chests. Aside from that, think about the way my storage system is set up right now. I have filtered storage for something like 128 different resources, each of which has 2 double chests attached to it. The amount of netherite that's going to take comes close to rivaling what you'd need for a 1 or 2 tier netherite beacon, and at that point, right, I'd rather use the netherite for something else. Like, I'm not going to netherite proof all of the double chests, and it feels a little bit like, I don't know, it feels like an unnecessary expense when a couple of torches positioned well around your base might do the same thing, and torches are much less expensive. I think it could be a fun flex, but I don't know if necessarily it's a worthwhile game mechanic. Aside from that, I tend to keep my valuables in a shulker box in an ender chest when I'm on like a multiplayer server. And it's not because I'm worried about creeper explosions or theft, it's more that it's just helpful to have them there so I can access them anywhere I want to. If I go to somebody's base, I want to trade, I end up having all of that stuff in an ender chest, where it is probably the most protected it can be, because even destroying the ender chest won't leak the contents back out into the world. You just have to find another ender chest and open it somewhere else. So I think there's an argument to be made for storing items like that differently, and there's an argument to be made for Mumbo just not being cautious enough about where he stored that stuff in the first place, rather than leaving options open for players to defend against creepers better.
Yeah, when I was reading the email and thinking about my response, I was like, when's the last time I had to worry about a creeper blowing up chests? And it's been a very long time, because you just naturally put your chests in a room, or even if it's just a convenient part of your build where you're not dealing with light changing or rain, or just being annoyed by a zombie. Like, you put them in places that you're just not going to be bothered. And usually that also reels out, being blown up by a creeper. The thing that I was curious about, talking about shulker boxes, is if this mechanic could be extended to shulker boxes, less for them being blown up in the world, more for them being something like lava proof. Because I have certainly been exploring in the nether where I have brought shulker boxes with me and then have lost them because I've died and my stuff went into lava. And I wasn't worried about some of my tools and my armor, because that would have been covered in netherite. But then some of the items I had in my inventory did not survive. And I've had, shulker boxes blown up in that way. So I could sort of see an argument there, but right there with you on, like, maybe netherite isn't the best for it. Like, I could see even just using iron to reinforce stuff for it to be blast proof. I think that might even be enough. It would make sense from real world construction mechanics and all that kind of stuff too. But yeah, I mean, yeah. It's funny when you think, I like the idea of like leaving your wallet out in the open. Like, that's a good example of like, yeah, maybe just don't do that. I guess it must be difficult from a game design perspective. Is like, how do you teach players a lesson that feels like you've made a mistake, but you don't want the player to feel bad. Like, you don't want necessarily like I mean, I don't mean bad in like you want them to feel that they've made an error, but you don't want them to feel so bad that they don't come back, or they think that this is dumb, or like, there's a fine line, I think, there between that. Because I feel like there are some things where I would want to warn a new player that I'm introducing to Minecraft about that rather than have them discover it for themselves, for fear that this friend that I have convinced to try the game with me would then no longer want to play the game, right?
Yeah.
Like that would be the balance that I would want to try to strike. And I think spoiling that life lesson would be worth it.
Yeah, and I think that kind of situation is how we end up with stuff like bees getting poisoned by eye blossoms. It's like we're not learning from any of this. Whereas, like, you
Right.
learn that creepers blow up your storage, then you start creeper proofing your storage. But you typically do that with torches or like a better door to your storage room or whatever it happens to be, right? Let's move on to the main discussion for this week. I want to talk about whether or not ender pearls are now the future of transport in Minecraft, because it's pretty powerful stuff at this point. Now that we've come out of the pre-release versions and the snapshots of this update, we can now ender pearl across dimensions in a stable way in Java Edition. You can hold them in stasis anywhere and trigger the ender pearl to recall the player to that point when, even if it's not in spawn chunks or an area that you have to like chunk load through other means, ender pearls do that themselves now. There's a lot of changes coming to ender pearls, and I'm wondering if that's going to be a new transport revolution before we even get changes to stuff like minecarts. Let's refer to the example I gave before. You can now set up basically anywhere something that's going to teleport you back to that location after a fixed amount of time. Or if you employ other wireless redstone behaviors, potentially you could trigger it from somewhere else in the world. That requires a little bit more research, but I think it's got a lot of potential for you to set up a transport network where all you have to do is not die, because dying ends up like destroying any ender pearls that are still in flight that you might have thrown before you died. Just so you don't end up getting teleported to where you would have landed after respawning, I suppose. But I find that one of the only drawbacks to setting up like a worldwide ender pearl network and just leaving ender pearls in different places and then being able to like recall yourself to those at a moment's notice. There's also the possibility of throwing an ender pearl through a nether portal, it going through the nether, going through another portal there and landing in a different place in the overworld, and by that means having a very technological feeling nether hub where you never actually have to walk through the dimension yourself. You just throw something through a portal and you come out at the other side and you're in a different location in the overworld. I find that concept pretty fascinating, and so I was wondering if that occurred to you, Joel, as something, considering you've set up like command blocks to teleport yourself around the Citadel before. Would you consider swapping that out for something more ender pearl focused and just put in a bit more effort into survival to see stuff like that done?
So I can see the nether aspect of it, like going through another portal with one pearl, having it go through a different portal in the nether and out into the overworld. Like that, you'd travel a decent amount of blocks, and that could be good if you're specifically in wanting to quickly go in different directions. Like you walk into your nether hub and then you've got like, we'll say 4 portals set up in 4 different cardinal directions, and you're trying to figure out which direction you want to go. The thing about the ender pearl teleportation that I may not understand is you can only use one at a time, right? So like once you've got an ender pearl in stasis, once it drops, you get sucked back to that location, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if I throw another ender pearl in stasis, which one do I get teleported back to?
Whichever one lands.
Right. So it's not you can't do anything with ender pearls while you're waiting. You can still, like, if you were building something, you have an ender pearl in stasis miles away, and you're using ender pearls to hop up a mountain. Like those ender pearls that you're using are not negating the one that's currently in stasis, right?
No,
like
they're independent from each other. Like if you can do this very easily just by throwing an ender pearl at like a high angle and then throw a second one at the block in front of you once that little cooldown finishes. Right. You're going to warp to the block in front of you because that ender pearl lands first, but then you're still going to be warped over to whatever location you threw the first ender pearl to. What matters is the order in which they land. It has nothing to do with any of them affecting each other. So in theory, you could just leave a bunch of plates spinning in different locations around the world, and whichever one you activate, that's the one that you get warped to, but then the others would all still remain there. The only thing that destroys them is if you die. And so, like, taking a little bit of damage as you land from an ender pearl could be a bit of a problem in some such situations.
Right.
But I do think it's perfectly possible to set up a situation where you can warp anywhere in the world that way.
Right. So for me, I guess it's the minor inconvenience of having used the ender pearl to warp yourself back. You then have to reload it into the suspension.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's where I'm just like, okay, so like the thing that you have to actually kind of do and set up and remember to set up again and that kind of stuff. So I mean, sure, I guess that I've never been in I guess I'd have to figure out, well, how am I going to trigger an ender pearl 10,000 blocks away when I want to come back when it's not on a timer?
Yeah.
Right. Like at what point? And that's where I'm using the command blocks. Basically, we've just made pretend portals and hidden a command block underneath. And the RP on the server is that you walk up to this portal and you press a button, or you could step on a pressure plate, I guess. And the command blocks just teleport the nearest player, which is like immediately on top of it, to another location that's in a building, or kind of like we've worked it into the decor, so it's a little bit more seamless, when you land in the area. But to get back and forth, like I'm now 10,000 blocks away from where I would have set up the original pearl. So I guess you'd have to like make sure you set up a pearl first, go through like how do you, like I don't know how you trigger the other pearl that's 10,000 blocks away at a moment's notice. Like what's the thing that gets that to drop right when you want it to, as opposed to on a timer. And that's where I think that the command block thing is just, for us, it's a better solution.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a more straightforward solution than the amount of technical stuff you'd have to figure out in survival. I think in order to remotely trigger something over a long distance, there are a few esoteric behaviors you have to know about certain redstone circuits. And I've seen these used in the past that, like, they're not going to be something that's visible or intuitive to the layperson. There's something that very high-level technical play happens around. There was a situation in which Doc M fired an arrow at a warden or like a player, I think, a couple of times through like maybe a distance of about 3,000 or so blocks. And you could do that by having a certain set of redstone repeaters set up a certain way, and there being like a sequence that basically, like, if you made a change to a repeater in one location, it would be reflected in the repeaters in another location, and that felt like unintended behavior, right? So it's not the kind of thing that is easily available in that sense. But yeah, I think once you crack stuff like that, or if you consider, like, I just did a bit of maths quickly, like 10,000 blocks is about 1,250 blocks in the nether. So if you're warping yourself that far in the overworld, I think it would be perfectly possible to set up a system by which you can throw a pearl through a nether portal. Maybe it gets aligned slightly better so that you avoid that randomness of throw direction. Maybe it bounces on a few slime blocks as it goes through the nether, can travel about 1,000 blocks, loading the dimension as it goes, and then pop through a nether portal at the other side, and then you end up at your location. So I think that there's maybe some room for mechanics like that to exist, even if like the wireless redstone aspects of it don't make sense. I think you can probably figure out smart ways of doing that through nether transport as well. You've just got to clear out all of the stuff and leave like slime block pistons that are going to fire as soon as the ender pearl gets within range, which takes a lot of trial and error, a lot of timing, but I think would be really satisfying to pull off.
I agree. It reminds me of like the fight in Endgame between Doctor Strange and Thanos and the Guardians of the Galaxy, and I think Spider-Man was with them too. And so like there's just portals opening up on either side of Thanos, and like characters are just like zooming through, punching him in the face and jumping in another portal. Like this was sort of what it feels like, right? Like I kind of wonder, like with the arc of an ender pearl, like if you could just get it right, set up something in your nether where like you're not going to hit it because it's too far away, but if you aim at it, it will give you the right arc, through trial and error to like get it to like exactly the spot that you want to be, and then have that kind of go along and move forward. I mean, it might even be easier in the end because you've got water mechanics in the end that you can use where you can't use water mechanics in the nether. Even a stronger argument for my way back old idea of having some sort of slime in the nether that would act like water, or be able to suspend your ender pearls in the nether in some sort of liquid that would be fun and like thematic with the nether. But yeah, I do like that idea again for like smaller distances. So rather than just like even just around the Nether hub, like we have to walk through corridors to get to different locations in Dartmouth Meadows, to get to the Iron Farm, to get to, the Guardian Farm, whatever. I would say that most of them are probably within an Ender Pearl throw. Not everything, but like there'd be a few immediate things that it would require an entirely different approach to another hub, right? You'd kind of want to be like on a central pillar when you arrive, and then you'd kind of want to have like a bunch of Nether portals around that are Ender Pearl distance, available in terms of their range, and then have that be, I guess at that point, I guess the angle that the pearl is going through won't affect necessarily your orientation, but it would affect like where you're landing in the overworld. So the portal in the overworld, you might want to have it be higher than where you want to be, so that the pearl will have like a natural path. But that would be really, really bizarre. I wonder what that looks like from a player perspective if you're in the overworld and the Ender Pearl, like, do you see the Ender Pearl come through the portal, like, or does your friend just appear next to you, right? Like when that happens, because that would be a wild experience as well, to try and figure out how that is perceived in the world from other players. And I guess in a way, it would have a lot of influence on where you would position your Nether portals. Like it would really change the way that you approach them, because so many times you just see them on the ground or on a path or in a very accessible walk up to it, walk through it location. And in this particular situation, it wouldn't need to be. Like maybe the best place for your Nether portal is hovering somewhere above your build, so that when you go through it, you come out at the right angle and you land precisely where you want to land, right?
Mm-hmm. I'm also curious if you could set up something like water streams to carry an Ender Pearl, because once the Ender Pearl loses all of its downward momentum, you can suspend it on the surface of a single water stream and it won't land on a block. And so if you could set up a series of water streams, maybe kind of cascading downwards, so that you don't end up having to, like, you have the water run out after 8 blocks. Normally when you're transporting items, you put like a block of ice and then another water stream after that, but that would basically mean that you landed on the block of ice. Instead, if you had this sort of cascading down by one block, almost like aqueduct, that you could transport Ender Pearls on. Imagine if you had a series of aqueducts, you throw an Ender Pearl in, and that just loads all of the chunks all the way to your destination. If you think about how fast you've probably seen items moving around on the surface of water, I wonder how that compares to the speed of player travel. Like, would that be faster than the minecart? Could it be faster than Elytra? I'm not certain. Probably not faster than like a boat ice road situation, but I kind of wonder, since that would load all of the chunks that the Ender Pearl traveled into, maybe you could have a transport network purely based around the overworld, where you just toss an Ender Pearl in, a minute later you're at the location and it's like a few thousand blocks away. Like, it would be really interesting to set up something like that, and again, provides the players so many more interesting ways of getting around. Like, if you've got your sci-fi project on the Citadel coming up as an example, throwing an Ender Pearl somewhere and then just being warped into somewhere that you had no real connection to, as though you've just been beamed up and suddenly you're in a spaceship or something, could be a really appealing concept for transport, just on a like a thematic level rather than a practical one. Like, it doesn't have to be the best way to travel, but it provides another really interesting way of getting around, and a way that seems obfuscated from the player. Like, it sort of feels like magic because you can't see absolutely everything that's happening.
I mean, you could hide a Nether portal behind a wall and just have like a very small portion of it visible, and just like walk up to that hole in the wall, throw in your Ender Pearl, and like have that be what teleports you into, like you said, a spaceship build that's up in the sky, or another area in the build. Like, that would be, if you've got them set up properly, that would be really, really interesting. I like the idea of the water stream. That's an interesting thought. I know that you could have them suspended in a bubble column, and I know that it doesn't affect crops because that has to be player proximity, but having an Ender Pearl travel we'll say indefinitely in a water stream around and around and around, keeping a bunch of chunks loaded, could be essential to certain kinds of farms that you might want to use. That kind of stuff could be really cool. I think it was a trident. I can't remember what Tango Tech was using the farm for, but it involved needing to go back and forth to the Nether in order to reset the spawn rate or the chunks or something. And it required like a minecart and a bunch of stuff that was really complicated for him to set up. In this situation, it would be more like an AFK farm. You'd have to have a macro to, throw an ender pearl once in a while. But you could easily get yourself back and forth between dimensions if you needed to. You just have to make sure that the player would get, ender pearls back into their inventory. But that seems to be something easy to do, in terms of like just timing a few droppers to drop you an ender pearl. And that could be an interesting way to very specific farms, I guess, that need that dimensional load unload thing to be executed by the player. I don't know whether AFK is really kind of going down the road that you wanted to talk about, but like there's a lot of things I think that some very technical players are going to get out of the new mechanics for ender pearls for sure.
Yeah. I think one of the other things that I've discovered that's worth noting, though, is that nether portal linking for stuff like that can be kind of unpredictable, or at least like it needs a bit more care and attention, because I often build portals in the nether at the correct coordinates, but I pay no attention to the direction that I'm building them. So sometimes the portal in the overworld can be north-south facing, while the portal in the nether is east-west facing. And the fun thing I've discovered about this is that the ender pearl does not observe the direction you are facing when you throw it through the portal. It observes what direction it's coming out of the portal so that you don't hit the frame. And so in those cases, if your portals are aligned and they're both north-south, if you throw it through facing north, you're going to arrive facing north and the pearl is going to travel facing north. If your portal in the nether is rotated by 90 degrees, the direction the player is standing and facing doesn't change. But if you throw an ender pearl through north, you travel east. And so the pearl goes through the portal face and lands further away from the portal, so you don't hit the frame on the north side of the portal. You travel east, but you're still facing north. And so you actually have to pay a lot of attention to which orientation you build your portals around if you're planning to use that to get back and forth through the nether, because you could end up traveling in a completely different direction and then build a new nether portal to get out to wherever it was you were trying to travel to, and then realize, wait a second, I'm not there, I'm east instead of north 500 blocks, So there's little kind of odd behaviors like that you could either see players taking advantage of in really fun ways, or you just have to be aware of when you're setting those things up.
Would it be more useful to have an ender pearl travel in a water stream in the overworld and then empty into a nether portal? I know that nether travel is going to be more efficient from a block perspective, but because the ender pearl is something that you have to throw in the nether, you can't send it quite as far as you could necessarily in a water stream. It'd be a lot of work to set up the water stream, but it might be a really interesting way to travel far in the nether by sending an ender pearl far in the overworld. Or really far in the overworld, I guess.
Yeah. I think there's we just think of the nether as like the fast travel option, but if you could chain stuff like that together. Like if you wanted a water stream to take you to a nether portal in the overworld, and then through that nether portal to another nether portal that's going to take you out into another stream that travels through the overworld, and that way you bridge the gap between areas that the nether portals could connect to. There's room for almost mixed media there, I guess.
Yeah.
I think the only disadvantage then is what you were talking about before, where you don't have an equivalent liquid like water to transport you through the nether. I think that's where maybe it becomes a little bit trickier, but I think there's possibilities for all kinds of travel like that. I'm just kind of my mind is fizzing right now. I'm kind of curious about where it can go.
Yeah.
I personally really wish you could skip ender pearls across water, and they would have as much horizontal momentum as they have vertical momentum a lot of the time. I've tried this a couple of times. One of the things I was trying on Empires for a little bit in Season 2 was seeing if you could set up a series of bubble columns across water so that they would keep the ender pearl suspended so that it wouldn't land, and effectively have little kind of bubble sections that if you threw the ender pearl right, it would skip from one to another and then land in a hole on the far side that could maybe be the entrance to a dungeon that you couldn't just swim into normally. You had to have an ender pearl thrown at the right angle. And unfortunately, they lose too much momentum once they hit the water, and they just don't have as much horizontal travel as they do vertical, potentially. But I would love there to be a bit of a change to that to make it so you could throw the ender pearl further horizontally, and that would lead to like being able to skip them like stones across like a pond, and have that lead to some interesting interactions on the other side.
Is there anything you could do to trigger a piston? Like if an ender pearl landed on a slime block, does the slime block trigger the ender pearl, or does that?
If it's
You
not
said you could
moving,
bounce them.
like the difficulty with it being a thrown entity is that it would normally land. It's kind of like how if you've got an inert block of TNT and it's pushed by a slime block, it doesn't inherently launch the TNT into the air. The TNT has to be lit, and then the slime block has to move. And then in order
Right.
to fling the TNT horizontally, you have to have another slime block come in to impact it while it's still moving. So there's a little bit of that has to go on. So the timing has to be really precise. I think maybe a thrown ender pearl could trigger a tripwire, and if it did that with the right timing, then that could potentially activate the piston as the ender pearl's coming into land. And there's maybe a couple of other ways you could do it. It might even be possible to do that with something like skulk sensors, but I don't know exactly what the timing there would have to be. And there might be a few ways of doing it, but if nothing else, you could have a redstone mechanism that is rigged to activate when the chunk loads, and the only time that chunk would get loaded would be like when the ender pearl is traveling towards it and loads it with the new property they have of loading stuff
Right.
while they're moving. And so, yeah, potentially you end up with situations where you can use them that way. But yeah, the slime block thing is probably the most difficult aspect of it because it involves very precise timing to keep the ender pearl traveling.
So when an ender pearl is thrown by the player and it ends up in a water block, it won't trigger until it actually hits like the bottom, right? Does
Yeah,
it sink
something
to the
solid,
bottom?
yeah.
Yeah, so okay. I'm just trying to think, like if it landed in water and then, as you mentioned, there was redstone triggered, and you could use dispensers with buckets to then add to the water or change the direction of the water and continue the pearl moving without it actually hitting the bottom. Like there's testing, I think, that could be done there to figure out like what exactly you could do to get that ender pearl to move around after it's technically, landed, in terms of it's no longer in the air, but it's not yet landed on a solid block to be triggered to continue to suspend it. Because I was thinking it would be neat if you had timed slime blocks on pistons, and they would kind of like mimic the motion of what you were saying, skipping across water, but instead it would be skipping across slime blocks that are just kind of like pushing it along.
Yeah.
But again, like impact with the slime block would be impact, and it would then be Mewtwo. You'd be standing on a slime block at that point.
I think there are still some drawbacks to discuss to this whole thing, because ender pearls they're a perfectly farmable resource. Once you've got access to the end, you can farm as many ender pearls as you need. I have far too many of them in the survival guide world, and I don't necessarily go to that enderman farm too much. But they only stack to 16 right now, and I think that's the main reason I don't end up using them more, is that like carrying a stack of them with you never feels like enough to me. I know people tend to use them for like getting in and out of builds and redstone areas and like, getting up to the roofs of stuff to work on things, but I typically find myself getting into like a crouch crawling position with elytra or a trapdoor, or like using fireworks to get up to the roof of something, wind charges now as well. So I find them not necessarily perfect as a solution to like short-term travel, and I feel like at 16 per stack, they're kind of inconvenient to carry. Having a full shulker box of them, you don't have as many as you think you do, I guess. And so I think the easiest solution would be to stash them at every place you expect to use them for transport and just refill them when you needed to. But the main problem I have with them right now is them only stacking to 16. Outside of that, endermites is the other thing I can think of, is like every so often when you land whatever, like when I was testing out my my timer kind of like computer setup that I have in survival guide now, I ended up warping back to the location and immediately got attacked. And so that's another potential, is like if you're not paying attention to when it's happening, if you're not prepared to fight an endermite, there's a probably 1 in 20 chance that you're going to have to.
Yeah. I don't find ender pearls pleasant to use. That's just a personal kind of feedback. Like it's that the noise of taking damage when you land, the little camera twist that happens. We have a data pack on the server that allows endermites to burrow into purpur and become shulkers. It was just for some people on the server, it was a better way to get shulker boxes than braving the end and losing all their stuff again. And so it's tedious. So we really feel like the trade-off is like, yeah, you know what? It's not as dangerous, but it's a real pain in the butt. So like have at it if you want to, but if you can get good enough, then the end is going to be the fast way to get your shulker boxes. But going back and forth, it really just is like an unpleasant kind of like, it's not a glitch in the game, but it feels like that kind of like stitch glitch thing that happens when you hit the wall with an ender pearl.
Yeah.
As you're going back and forth on the purpur to try to get going. So I've never really found them that fun to use. How many ender pearls can you fit in a bundle?
I mean, it's the same as a full stack, so 16. And they 16, take up
right.
4 items worth of space. It's and anything that stacks to 16 effectively divides the stack by 4, right? So yeah, that's
right,
the same,
so that's
same kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's too bad. I mean, a purple bundle would be like the perfect place to keep, ender pearls if they stacked differently. Like if that was something that the bundle could do, would be to allow items that only go to 16 to stack higher. That would be very, very useful. But yeah, the only thing I can think of would be nice would be similar to resin, blocks of resin. Having a new block in the game, like a block of ender pearl, would be very unique texture, be kind of very specific use case. But if you could compress them down and store them that way, then that would allow you to carry more with you in a smaller space. I think that would be kind of fun. And it would add like multiple gameplay mechanics to the game. New block to play with, new color texture to play with, a new way to use the crafter at your Enderman farms, to compress the block down into different things. So I think there's some ideas there, but yeah, I don't like endermites. I don't like the stack sizes. I have ender pearls around specifically for tree farming. I do that trick where you throw the ender pearl up in the air, bone meal the 4 saplings for a giant spruce tree, and then it grows, and then the ender pearl lands on the top of the tree, and you can just mine down without having to climb up the tree or fly up with your elytra. It's not like it's the end of the world, but it's just a fun trick to make it convenient. But that's the only thing I really use them for. Even when flying around and jumping from rooftop to rooftop in the Citadel, I tend to just use elytra. Like I just tend to use rockets, despite the fact that the rockets overshoot you way past where you need to go. I've just gotten good at like spinning around and taking the momentum out of the rocket and landing on like the next rooftop. For whatever reason, I don't seem to use ender pearls for any other real practical reason. So this idea of using them as teleporting or timers, I think, is probably a good thing. Something that just dawned on me actually would be timing for mini games. Like if rather than like having to rely. I mean, if you're among friends, I mean, obviously just play honestly. But like if it's a server or something like that, where like everybody suspends an ender pearl, and like at the exact same time, all of those ender pearls are dropped, and whatever you're doing, a mining competition or a race, whatever that happens to be, you are immediately stopped and sucked back to your time is up. And that could be a very accurate way of timing some mini games too.
Yeah, great way to do aber caving. Everybody throws their ender pearls in at the beginning. You don't have to worry about staying in that chunk because it stays loaded, and then the timer goes off at the end. Like it makes sense.
Yeah.
I think servers could have a lot of fun with stuff like this, and I'm imagining that some of the more technical servers will want to have like an ender pearl transport network to them sooner or later. So I don't know if it will replace the piston bolt, but it'll certainly be a little bit less resource intensive. Either way, if you're planning on using ender pearls for stuff like this, we'd love to hear from you. So email us at the usual address if you've got any fun plans for how to use them on your worlds. That's where we're going to be wrapping up this episode of The Spawn Chunks. You can find more information about the show and links to some of the stuff that we talked about today over at thespawnchunks.com. The music for the show is composed by me, and The Spawn Chunks is proud as ever to be a listener-supported podcast. If you're getting some value out of the show, why not consider putting some value back in? You can do that at patreon.com/thespawnchunks, where joining at any level gets you an invite to our patrons-only Discord chat. You can listen to the show live when we record it in Discord every week. We have our monthly hangouts where patrons can show us what they've been up to in Minecraft that month, and we have quarterly hangouts on the calendar as well. Currently, we have 306 patrons, which is up 2 from last week. There is always room for more. Special thanks go out to our content engineer patrons, Gundar H. Striker, Hunter555, Jumbo Sale, Mindtrip Media, Party Voyager, and Yitz. Thank you all for your support on this episode.
Sharing the podcast with your friends is the easiest way to support the show. You can find us at The Spawn Chunks on social media. You can find the new episodes available every Monday on your favorite podcasting app. There's also the video version here on YouTube. Be sure to check out the Patreon page as well. That's where you get the extended version of the podcast. It's in an RSS feed. You can put it in the same podcast app that you're using. It's a great way to keep up with the show. Don't forget to email us at spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. And of course, the render distance is available on the Patreon page as well.
My name is Johnny, but online I go by Pixelriffs. You can find most of what I do at youtube.com/Pixelriffs, where the Minecraft Survival Guide is currently in its 3rd season. I also stream 3 days a week on Twitch, where I do behind-the-scenes work for my YouTube series and play other games from time to time. I'm the voice of the unofficial Hermitcraft recap, which you can find through a quick YouTube search. And aside from that, I'm at Pixelriffs on Instagram, and I'm using Blue Sky a little bit as well. Joel, where can people find you online?
Everything that I'm doing online can be found at joelduggan.com. That includes a link to the Citadel Cafe, my other podcast about sci-fi and fantasy entertainment. Coming up on 13 years on the Citadel Cafe, and recording with Steven soon, talking about Arcane Season 2, which will be the final season. The first 3 episodes came out this week, so we'll be reviewing those and talking about those. I highly recommend it if you are a fan of that stuff. They are just as good as the first season. I really, really enjoyed it. You can, of course, find me at Joel Duggan on social media, very easy to find, and Joel Duggan on Twitch, where I currently stream Tuesday through Saturday at 1 o'clock Atlantic. That's UTC minus 4 hours now that we've switched the time. And I do all kinds of stuff there. So Satisfactory, Lego streams, and Minecraft, of course. So we'll see you there.
Thanks for visiting the Spawn Chunks. The world outside is infinite, but with a teleporter, that's not so bad.